Here we are at target 3A from our chapter 5 study guide. We're asked to state the horizontal asymptote, stating the domain, range, and then determine whether it's increasing or decreasing, and then finally graph the exponential function. Now, in looking at 3A, we do notice that we have this exponential function where 3 is our A value, this 2 is our B, and our exponent, making it that variable with x, making it that exponential function. And then lastly, this minus 1 is kind of acting as our HA. So again, just kind of labeling things just to kind of help us out a little bit. A is our 3, B is this 2. We have that variable x making it the exponential function, and this negative 1 is kind of that HA again. So in just starting things off, let's go ahead and identify our horizontal asymptote. So our HA, we know is that kind of electrical fence that we cannot cross. So in this case, it is this line y equals negative 1. There we have our x and y axis. So when we do that, we end up then again with that HA at negative 1. So now we're going to go ahead and just plug in some values. Let's go ahead and dump in 0 for x, and then see what the y value comes out to be. So again, if we throw in 0, we end up with 3 times 2 raised to the 0 power minus 1. In which case we end up then with 3 times, anything raised to the 0 power is just 1, minus 1. 3 times 1 is 3, minus 1. And it looks like we end up with that y value being 2. So again, when we plugged in 0, we ended up with the y value 2. Choosing another point, let's go with 1. Again, that's a nice easy 1 as an exponent. We end up then with y equals 3 times that base 2 raised to the first power minus 1. So we end up with y equals 3 times, really 2 to the first is just 2. So we end up then with 6 minus 1. So it looks like our y value comes out to be 5. So again, when we plug in 1, we end up with the y value 5. Let's try going ahead and plugging in 2. So if we plug in 2 to this value, or into this function, we end up with y equals 3 times the base 2 raised to the second power minus 1. 2 squared gives us 4 minus 1. And y is equal to 12 minus 1, or 11. So y is equal to 11 when we plug in 2. One more point, we'll go ahead and maybe go back to negative 1. So if we plug in negative 1 for our x value, we end up then with y equals 3 times 2 raised to the negative first minus 1. But again, we can't have negative exponents, so we're going to put this on the bottom, that base 2 on the bottom. It is raised to the now positive first power, and we know that we have a 1 on top, minus 1. Simplifying things up, we end up with 3 times, really a half, minus 1. Then y is equal to 3 times a half gives us 3 halves, minus 1. Which is really the same thing as saying 1 and 1 half minus 1, or finally 1 half. So again, when we plugged in negative 1, we should have ended up with the y value 1 over 2. Going ahead now and graphing these, we have 0, 2, right about there. When we graphed the green one at 1, we ended up with a y value 5. Right about there. And then 2, we ended up with 11. So we're right about there. And then finally our orange one, negative 1 1/2. Negative -1. Yeah, right about there. So when we finally connect these, we should see an image that is going upwards like this. We see it exponentially growing. Now, that's going to majorly help us in terms of stating some things, such as the domain. Well, we know that for our domain, for any exponential function, anything, it doesn't really matter. Our domain is always going to be from negative infinity to positive infinity. And the reason for that is we can see clearly with these arrows that this graph will continue on forever in the negative direction. And this arrow right here is saying it's going to keep going upwards and upwards and upwards, but it is still kind of going over a little bit to the right into the positive direction. And so that's why our domain for any exponential function is negative infinity to positive infinity. Talking about the range now. Well, we start from our bottom and then go up. So it looks like the smallest thing that y can be here is -1. But since it can't be -1 because it is an electrical fence, we do have that parenthesis around it. It means we can't actually obtain it. And then we see that our y values are going up to positive infinity. So again, our y values, they start off at -1 and just kind of work their way upwards to positive infinity. You can put the little positives in front of them. That's totally fine. That really doesn't matter. Anytime you don't put them, it's kind of assumed it's positive. So you don't have to. Now, determining if this thing is increasing or decreasing, well, we do see that our graph is going upwards, as we can kind of tell. So it is, as a result, increasing. This graph would be increasing then. So again, though, that is target 3A from our Chapter 5 study guide.